In just 10 months, Donald Trump has done something no U.S. president has managed in over half a century. He's shattered the speed record for debt not an eye-watering. $1.6 trillion has been added to America's national debt in less than a year. That's not just a number on a government ledger. It's a fiscal earthquake, the fastest buildup of debt in modern history. And if you think that pace is sustainable, think again, because the deeper we go into the numbers, the more alarming. The picture becomes, this isn't about politics. It's about math. And the math tells us America is sprinting toward a cliff. The record no one wanted, July 28, 2025, the U.S. Treasury quietly dropped a report that landed like a bombshell. Washington will need to borrow $1.66 trillion in new net marketable debt before the end of the year. That's not long-term infrastructure spending. That's not rebuilding after a national disaster. That's not wartime emergency financing. This is ordinary, day-to-day government operations. Payroll, benefits, and bills. For comparison, the United States added about $1 trillion to the debt during the global financial crisis of 2008. It took a meltdown of Wall Street, a housing collapse, and the worst recession in a generation to reach that figure. Trump's administration? It hit that level in about 6 months of relative stability. In July alone, the government overspent its budget by $291 billion, nearly 20% higher than the same month last year. The numbers don't lie. America is burning through cash at a pace unmatched since the COVID stimulus surge of 2020 to 2021. But this time, there's no pandemic, no extraordinary emergency. This is routine. Borrowing like there's no tomorrow. The Treasury's borrowing schedule tells the story. From July through September, the U.S. will issue $1 trillion in new debt. From October through December, another $590 billion. And those are just the net figures. They don't even count the trillions in debt that must be refinanced as old bonds mature. Like paying off one maxed-out credit card by opening another. Some of this new borrowing will be parked in the Treasury General Account, TGA, the government's checking account. By year's end, the TGA is projected to hold about $850 billion. But here's the kicker. Only $400 to $500 billion of the planned borrowing will end up there. The rest, about $1.2 trillion, will vanish instantly into deficit spending. Money out the door as fast as it arrives. This isn't building bridges or investing in research. It's plugging the holes in a budget where obligations grow faster than revenues. Tariffs. The illusion of stability. The White House insists tariffs are strengthening the budget. And yes, customs duties have surged. In July alone, tariff revenue topped $20 billion. But that's a drop in the bucket compared to a $291 billion monthly deficit. Even with tariffs, America's red ink widened almost 20% year over year. The math simply doesn't work. Tariffs may generate applause lines at rallies, but they don't even begin to cover the cost of exploding obligations in Social Security, health care, and most of all interest payments on existing debt. The interest. Time bomb here's where things turn from troubling to dangerous. The U.S. national debt has already surged past $37 trillion and is approaching $38 trillion. Every new dollar borrowed locks in interest payments that must be made every year, forever. By 2034, interest payments alone are projected to consume 29% of all federal revenue, more than $2.2 trillion annually. That's nearly a third of every tax dollar spent before funding the military, schools, infrastructure, or anything else. Think about that. A government handcuffed by its own debt, pouring money into past obligations instead of future investments, isn't just a fiscal headache. It's a strategic vulnerability. What happens in a crisis? If America is borrowing at this pace in relatively stable times, what happens when the next real crisis hits? Picture it. Revenues fall as the economy slows. Borrowing costs spike as investors demand higher yields to hold U.S. debt. Suddenly, the fragile balance collapses, and Washington is left scrambling to plug holes in weeks, not years. That's the nightmare scenario economists warn about. Not because the U.S. can't borrow more today, but because the trajectory is unsustainable when tested by shock. Month after month, the debt curve steepens. January 2024, $34 trillion. July 2024, $35 trillion. December 2024, $36 trillion. August 2025, $37 trillion. That's roughly $1 trillion every 5 to 6 months twice, the long-term average of the past quarter century. The slope is accelerating, and once momentum takes over, it's brutally hard. To reverse. Why not just stop borrowing? A fair question. Why can't Washington simply stop borrowing, tighten spending, and balance the books? The uncomfortable answer is tied to the structure of the U.S. economy. Every dollar in circulation represents someone's debt, and every debt carries interest. If the government suddenly stopped issuing debt, the money supply would shrink. Dollars would disappear, and the economy wouldn't slow gently. It would slam into a deflationary spiral. Deflation sounds appealing: lower prices, cheaper goods. But in reality, it's poison. Falling prices slash business revenues. Companies cut wages or lay off workers. Spending collapses. Profits vanish. The downturn feeds on itself. That's what turned the Great Depression into a decade-long catastrophe. Debt remained, but money evaporated. The system cannibalized itself. For decades, both Republicans and Democrats have kept that cliff at bay by continually expanding debt. But the cycle has now entered a more dangerous phase. Borrowing at record speed, with no long-term plan. The downgrade that changed everything in May 2025. Moody's, the last of the big three credit rating agencies holding out, downgraded U.S. debt from IAA to AA1. That single-letter change carries weight. It signals to investors worldwide that U.S. debt is no longer risk-free. And higher risk means higher costs, not just for the government, but for households and businesses. Mortgages, car loans, business credit, all tied to U.S. Treasury rates, become more expensive. Once trust is lost, restoring it is slow and costly, sometimes impossible. The foreign leverage problem. Here's the part most Americans don't like to think about. The United States owes vast sums to foreign governments. Japan, China, and the United Kingdom together hold hundreds of billions in U.S. Treasury securities. Think of them as America's biggest credit card companies, collecting interest while Washington struggles to pay down the balance. The more America borrows, the more interest flows abroad, strengthening rivals and allies alike. In effect, Washington is redistributing wealth to foreign capitals every month without a single law being passed. And those governments aren't passive. China has already used its debt holdings as leverage, hinting at slowing purchases to pressure Washington in trade disputes. Japan benefits too, supporting the yen and gaining weight in negotiations. Every new dollar borrowed tightens that grip. Redistribution at home. Debt doesn't just shape global politics, it reshapes society at home. Persistent borrowing and inflation quietly transfer wealth from savers to borrowers. Ordinary families holding cash or low-yield savings lose purchasing power. Asset owners and large borrowers, corporations, hedge funds, the federal government benefit as inflation erodes the real cost of their debt. Over time, this imbalance widens inequality, hollowing out the middle class and deepening social divides. It's an invisible tax, paid not at the ballot box, but at the grocery store, the gas pump, and the bank. A dangerous illusion for all the patriotic speeches about making America great again. The hard truth is that the U.S. economy is running On borrowed fuel, the White House may celebrate tariff revenues and talk up strength, but tariffs are a temporary cushion. Importers adapt. Supply chains reroute. Trade partners find new markets. The revenue fades. The obligations don't. A strong tariff month still leaves a $291 billion deficit. Imagine what happens in a weak month. That's when the spiral accelerates. That's when jobs, businesses, and savings are pulled down together. The road ahead, the U.S. now faces a paradox. It can't stop borrowing without risking deflation. But it can't keep borrowing at this pace without risking collapse. Either path is perilous. And the longer Washington delays serious reforms, the narrower the options become. The borrowing surge of 2025 isn't just another chapter in the fiscal story. It's a tipping point, one that will shape America's economy, politics, and place in the world for decades to come. So the question is no longer if the reckoning comes. It's when, and whether America will be the one writing its future, or whether that future will be dictated by the creditors holding the purse strings.